Alright, so here we are with Killjoy, and we're going to talk about some music. So, we've known each other for quite a while,
Oh yeah.
lost touch for a while. What does it feel like now, looking at all the metal underground and knowing exactly where it's at today and how huge of a market there is for the underground scene, knowing that you were there in the beginning creating it, and what kind of influence and what kind of people are coming to you and saying you were like an influence? And
It's kind of a weird thing because when I got out of music for a while from like 91 to 97, and in that period of time it seems like that's really when what I did with Necrophagia started affecting a lot of the bands, and I would say it was mostly black metal bands that we had any kind of direct influence on. Maybe lyrics and imagery. You know, a lot of the death metal bands of today kind of borrowed or used some of that, but musically I think a lot of the black metal bands were more influenced by it. Maybe something like Mayhem, Dark Throne, some of those types of bands.
yeah, because for me, a lot of the stuff I hear a total Necrophagia influence, like a lot of stuff. I mean, then they take predominantly in Europe, they can take something Americanized and make it their own, which
It's usually the other way around, you know.
yeah.
For the most part. Unlike you, I tend to like the European bands a lot better than American bands, and I think that we probably had, as a U.S. band, maybe more of an impact on what's happened in Europe in the early 90s through now than a lot of the other U.S. bands.
What do you think? Why did you start playing music? What was like the predominant reason?
Sex Pistols, Plasmatics. Then in like 1981, I heard Venom and Motorhead, and by the time 83 rolled around, I had heard Venom, or no, it was Hellhammer, Apocalyptic Raids, and it just blew my mind,
Right.
you know. So it kind of started out with a lot of the punk stuff, which I still like. I mean, the attitude and the aggression of that maybe not shows up as an influence musically, but attitude-wise, you know, it'll always be with me. And, you know, just kind of progressed from that. Merciful Fate, Venom, Celtic Frost, Hellhammer were really the only guidelines that I had when I started this. I mean, there was no kind of set formula. When I started singing, I just wanted to sound like the girl from The Exorcist.
Don't we all? So what do you think about the whole state of music today? I mean, obviously when you were doing it, it was like sort of about 10 steps ahead of everybody else when the whole speed metal, or whatever you want to fucking call it, underground metal scene was brewing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like big business to a degree, and there's a lot of bands worldwide doing it.
Oh, absolutely. I think
So, what do you think about that?
it's you know, good in some aspects, but in a lot of ways it's made it harder for kids to decide what to buy. You know, from my point of view, I think anyone that is trying is, you know, I don't take anything away from them, but at the same time, there's not very much of the newer stuff that I personally would buy.
Right, and that's probably why you started your own labels for the new bands, because you, as myself, are fans of music. You know,
Absolutely.
we went to the store today, bought CDs. So you basically set up your labels so you can find bands that you believe need to be exposed and are honest bands.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. Is that the prominent reason of starting your label?
Yeah, I wanted to try to make at least a little bit of a dent in it, and try to run a label from a band's perspective instead of so many of these bands sign to a label and sign their life away.
Yeah.
And you know, they don't really get anything out of it. And my biggest concern is if nothing else, to the period when I first started, it would be a springboard to show them how things are done, try to promote them properly, and expose them to a wider audience. And say just putting out a demo or putting out their own CD, at least I can get it into stores and that. And if they're happy with what I do and they want to grow with the label, that's fine. But if not, I don't ever hold any band. I mean, to me, the contract is just a technicality. If you were on my label and you said, I appreciate what you did, but this label's offering us a lot of money, I wouldn't say, well, I have you signed for 3 albums, you're not going. I would be more or less, letting you go with my blessings.
So as far as what do you think about the whole what do you look at today, like as for me, the whole metal scene, the underground metal scene right now was what hardcore was to me when I was a kid, and I was like 13, 14. What Minor Threat and Black Flag were doing is no different than what I think Dark Throne or Emperor were doing a few years ago. So what do you think about as far as the European scene and metal versus like what's happening in American and metal? Because I'll be honest with you, there's not many American bands, like we said, we've talked, that I listen to that are really like black metal or whatever kind of underground metal that are really, really like inspiring to me. There's a couple things you've put on your label, like that Summon, the Thornspawn, I really dug. And but it seems like predominantly in recent years, why do you think it is that so much of the music that's coming out of Europe is so much more, to me, meaningful and hateful? It seems like there's a general angst there, and you've been there many times and are friends with all these people.
I would have to agree with that. Basically, I think you hit it right on the head when you said that it reminds me also of what was going on in the early 80s with the whole punk explosion that we had for a while. I think that it started over there. The whole black metal scene started over there, and they did it out of pure rebellion. They didn't like what was going on. They didn't like the whole way that death metal had changed into something else. All the sweatpants and everyone had to have the same guitar sound and the same tones. So, I think that the early black metal was like kind of almost a backlash against what was going on in the U.S. because in the late 80s, U.S. death metal started getting real big. Everyone was recording at Morrisound, and that was the end thing to do. And I think a lot of the black metal went back to embracing the true, for lack of a better word, the true dark side of what metal had started out in the 80s with bands like Death and Celtic Frost and all of that. And to me, now so many of the bands that come up in the U.S. are just kind of like imitations of what's going on or what's already passed. And then you have a few exceptions, like a band like Thornspawn, who have their own influences but are trying to put their own twist on it. So to me, I think that Europe has always been a step ahead. You had Sodom over there first, you had Venom over in Europe, Celtic Frost, and all the bands that are still a major influence. The U.S. came back with Slayer, who to me, the old Slayer is still some of my very favorite music ever, but if I had to list my top 20 bands, I'm sure 15 of the 20 in a metal category would be European bands.
Yeah. And what are you listening? What are you predominantly listening to now, inspirationally, or reading, or film-wise? What are your influences?
Well, musically, I really don't listen to anything to get inspired by. My inspiration comes more from stuff like watching horror movies or things that I think of. It's almost like every song for Necrophagia is like a small script to a movie. I can actually visualize a lot of what's going on in that. musically, I listen to a lot of the early '90s black metal. I still listen to the Sex Pistols. Um, there's not a whole lot of newer bands that I've heard in the last few years, other than bands that I've signed, and of course, Amen. I mean, not just because you're sitting here, but I mean, I genuinely like it. If I didn't, but there's just not that many bands that actually have any kind of influence on me anymore. Early influences, like I said, would be the Plasmatics are probably my biggest influence ever. Although you're not going to directly hear that in what I do.
Course.
But the Plasmatics, the Sex Pistols, Venom, Celtic Frost, and Merciful Fate are probably the biggest influences I've ever had, along with movies like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beyond, Zombie, New York Ripper. I mean, that's where my influences come from.
And then, like with the Fulci tie, what was the? There was so much on the last, the full album. What was so passionate about him for you?
Well, I think that Fulci was definitely a pioneer. I was really young when I saw the movie Zombie for the first time, and I'd seen a lot of stuff, the George Romero Living Dead movies and that, but when I saw Fulci's, it was so crude, but yet it took it to more of an extreme. And one of the scenes to this day that people still talk about is when the girl is getting her hair pulled, and she's going closer and closer to that splinter, and you're just waiting for the camera to cut away, and it never does. And when you see that splinter actually enter her eye and her eye just explode, to me that's something I'll never forget. So I think that he was someone that was willing to, he obviously had his own influences, but he took it and ran with it, and took it to an extreme that no one else had went to at that point in time. And with Holocausto de la Muerte, it was kind of my way of paying tribute to him, because I still think that he's underrated, although in the last couple years you see his name pop up a little bit more with Quentin Tarantino saying he was an influence, and then with the DVD market, it's been a huge way of promoting him. But when I did that album, and with the whole cover idea of it, at that time it was just my way of letting people know that he was out there, and what kind of inspiration he was to Necrophagia.
So, what do you have next? What's planned next for Necrophagia and Killjoy in general?
Well, there's the next album will be called Harvest Ritual, and we're hoping to have that out by like maybe March of 2002. And we just recorded one new song called Cannibal Holocaust for the DVD release of Cannibal Holocaust. Getting ready to do another Ravenous album. The next step after that would be Amicus, which is going to be a lot of fun. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, which is really fast black metal, the whole double bass and just really hideous riffs. And by doing stuff like that, it helps to me keep Necrophagia pure. It doesn't make me want to take Necrophagia into more of a black metal mode, or vice versa. I get asked a lot of times, why do you do all these different bands and not just concentrate on Necrophagia? And it's just because there's a lot of different styles that I like, and instead of doing what a lot of bands do, is just bring those type of influences into what they do. I'd rather kind of exercise all those demons and then concentrate on just making Necrophagia heavier and sicker without pulling those types of styles into it.
And then now I hear that you started up a DVD company, something like that.
Yeah, that's called Star God. That's something we're really excited about. We want to try to get that going. We got a few different movies we're looking at, and that's something I think that we're all going to have a lot of fun with over the next few years, because everyone involved in it, myself, you, Ross, and Lenny, Lisa, especially I guess you and I, we have a lot of the same taste, whether it's extreme horror or just something completely fucked up like Gummo or Suburbia. Whoever put out Suburbia, fuck you, because we were dead set on doing that one. So if anyone's watching this and thinking about putting out Rude Boy,
damn. Just exposing a lot of good films that people never really got to see, just like the music that you're doing and the bands that you're signing.
Yeah.
Expose it for the honest intent of what it is.
Absolutely.
And there's no money motivation of releasing something that was just personal satisfaction of being able to expose the honesty and integrity, in filmmaking, music, art, whatever the fuck it is, as long as it's pure,
Yeah.
and not money motivated, which is the civilization that you and I live in America. So pretty much there you got it, Mr. Killjoy himself. Thank you for your time. Till then, piss off.